everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Diane Leonard, president of D.H. Leonard Consulting and Grant Writing Services. And we're here today to talk about our Agile and nonprofits work, to help nonprofits think about what is Agile, how does that work in our organizations, what are some of the different ways we can tackle projects, programs, services, and improving the way that we deliver impact in our community. And so I'm thrilled that we've got a special guest with us today and fellow trainer for our team. Hi, Jessica.
Hi, I'm Jessica Crowley. I am an enterprise Agile coach and Agile trainer on the Agile and Nonprofits team. And I've been doing quite a bit of research lately, looking at articles and relevant studies out in the industry about nonprofits going on an Agile journey to become more agile and nimble in the way that they operate. So I stumbled upon this compelling, really well-written article called DataArts, and it was becoming the Agile nonprofit. And I was like, wow, I have to read this article. So I read through it, and actually that's what led to this special guest that we have here, Beth Tuttle. Beth is the prior president and CEO of DataArts, and now it's known as SMUDataArts. Beth, welcome. I'd love to have you take a moment to just introduce yourself a little bit to our viewers and maybe tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write such an interesting article.
Thanks, Jessica. And Diane, it's great to be here with you and eager to chat with you and your listeners. So my background has been in nonprofit management almost my full career. I've run a consultancy that has worked with organizations, national and local, lots and lots of experience working in the arts and culture sector. And today I run essentially a business that is a combination of a coaching and consulting business, because I also work with executive leaders around leadership and how they lead and think about their organizations. So I became the president of DataArts back in 2013. And we can talk a little bit more about what was happening at that time with the organization. But in terms of your question, I was really inspired to write the article because my team and I wanted to share the powerful positive impacts that we were experiencing from adopting really a new way of thinking and working within what was a very complex mission-driven organization. And that's a pretty good description of what most nonprofits are, complex mission-driven organizations. You know, we were living a journey that began with Agile as a technology development approach, but it ultimately became really a core organizational philosophy and a way of being for us. The journey was teaching us so much about how to be responsive and relevant, how to be more efficient and effective, and really fundamentally committed to the notion that we were working in service not to the business outcomes solely, but more importantly to that set of, you know, diverse customers and stakeholders that we were serving. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it began as kind of as I wrote in the article, sort of an unsettling mashup, if you will, of cultures and language and approaches. But it gave birth really to a more flexible and more empowered organization. And so that's why we decided to write the article, because really wanted to educate and inspire the other nonprofits, the public and private grant makers who all worked within this system to come on the journey with us, because we thought it had great implications for the field.
That's amazing.
And so, Beth, as you think about, you know, you said it was lots happening, language, different way of doing work. So what was the launch point? What was the moment that really helped, well, now SMUDataArts, then DataArts, what helped you take that first step on your Agile journey?
Well, as I said, I joined DataArts in 2013. I became its first president and CEO, and my charge was really to take it out from under the auspices of the Pew Charitable Trust, where it had been incubated for over a decade, and had been developing and deploying the cultural data profile, which is the core technology platform. And so the CDP, for those who aren't familiar with it, it's an online financial reporting application that was being used by tens of thousands of arts and culture organizations and hundreds of grant makers as an essential part of the grant application process. And what it did was it really allowed the grant makers to collect standardized financial and operational data that was then used to inform funding decisions, marketing and management strategy by the organizations themselves, and then was really a driver for local and national field research. So just with that background in mind, because not everybody is familiar with, the CDP or DataArts, that when I arrived at the organization, my charge was to take this system national. Well, immediately, because I came out, I have a background in advertising and marketing and product development, we immediately conducted some user research and a systems assessment, because I didn't know if I had a product that I could take national, right? Did anybody want it? Did it work? Was it robust enough to handle, tens of thousands more users at any given time? And so what came back to us from that research was that we learned that the system was really hard for the arts managers to use, and that while participation in it was very valuable to the grant makers who were paying the bills, it was not very valuable and a pretty big burden for the actual grant seekers who were being required to use it. But more importantly, those grant seekers were the fundamental supplier of the product, because without their data, there was no product, right? So it was a very complicated narrative of understanding that there was a real problem in the value proposition, and then also coming to understand that the code base was not adequate and robust enough to manage what was growing pretty rapidly at that time. Mm-hmm. So we began working with an application developer, the group called the Kyle David Group, who are based in Pennsylvania. But they really introduced my non-tech team, because we had not a single professional technologist. Well, we had one professional technologist, let me put it that way, in our organization at that time. So they introduced our non-tech team to Agile and Scrum and Sprint, approaches. So that's how we got started on the journey of redesigning, rebuilding the platform. And that's what started us on the approach that said, wow, if we don't listen to and be responsive to these core users, we can build this thing any which way we want, and it's still not going to do the job.
And that's some of what as we unpack what you said, that's some of what drew me into your article. Was you used empiricism, right? You looked for data, you collected the data, you aggregated it, you saw the trends, you saw the, high level, what does the user really want? And then you created releases, right? That's another thing I saw, is that you didn't just wait and create this beautiful cultural data profile interface. You slowly iterated and you released functionality. And sometimes you said you released it and there were even bugs, or there were things that weren't exactly perfect.
Lord, yes.
And I thought, my goodness, if there's nothing more agile than that. And I think the other thing that as I'm listening to you, the other thing I found fascinating was the technology piece, and having your beginning seed be an outside, technical company that has agile experts on it. And the reason I'm smiling and kind of just is that last week we had an interview with Eric Ressler. I'm not sure if you saw that, from Cosmic, and he has a technology company, and he said that his company is spreading agile to nonprofits through the same exact way. So that just kind of really cool, very inspiring.
It really, there were so many factors that led us in this direction. I mean, one was, we left a multi-billion-dollar foundation home and became a little tiny independent scrappy nonprofit. Well, that's a giant, that's a huge mental shift. It's a huge financial shift. And we had to become efficient, and we had to be able to operate in a lean manner, because we couldn't afford the kind of waste that a billion-dollar foundation could afford. Not that they wanted to, and not that they intended to, but just their processes were just so heavy and laden for what needed to be a really nimble little, organization, a nimble and responsive organization. So I have to give a lot of credit to, my partner on the technology side, to Kyle, who really, he was sort of he was the agile whisperer in my ear, if you will, kind of teaching me this. I did not have a technology background. I understood a lot about arts and cultural management, and I understood a lot about nonprofits and the way they think and operate. I knew I was coming in to run a technology-based company, but I didn't realize I was coming in to build a piece of technology. Nobody anticipated that. So when it came down to the fact that we needed to rebuild this platform, we had to be able to go out there and get investment. We needed capital. Mm-hmm. We had some capital to run the organization, but if we didn't get an investment of capital from, really significant sources, we couldn't build the platform and the whole thing would go under. So all of these things were swirling around, and in going out to traditional grant makers to tell a story that says, we need to build something, but we don't know what it is. We know and by the way, we have to keep the thing that we've already built running while we build, because everybody's grant deadlines don't stop, right? So all these organizations were filing grant applications and completing the CDP literally day in and day out while we were building the new platform and starting to introduce it. And so, if we didn't start educating those grant makers and those users very early in the process, like, this isn't going to be kind of what you expect. We're not going to sit here for 4 years and build this thing and then go ta-da and hope everybody likes it, because we learned that that's how they did it the first time, and they built something that really didn't meet the needs of the arts and cultural users. And I give them, I give them grace in that, because it was a group of grant makers who built it. Wow. They built it for themselves. They built it to meet the needs that they had, but really, when you looked at it through the other end of the telescope and you realized that the whole reason they built it was to not only help themselves, but it was really, they wanted to help organizations get better at understanding their capitalization, right? Get better at understanding what is, their marketing ratios and their indices that are key performance indicators. This is a time, it was started, the cultural data profile was started right after the 2008 crash, or 2004. So it was being built in a time when organizations were in severe economic distress. And it was really designed to help those organizations become stronger. And it wasn't working.
Well, and our team had some clients that used to have to fill it out. And it wasn't their favorite part of the process, which goes to your point for why you were thinking about, there's two stakeholders here, the grant makers, always well-intentioned, right? But then what did that look like for grant seekers? And we've seen then clients experience, without them knowing you were on an agile journey, that you were iterating, right? They were very happy with the changes that they saw come out. But I'm curious to hear more about how then the lessons of the agile journey through that technical process and the actual tool you were going to deliver, which was a success story. How did you take any of those learnings, the agile principles? Did they, and if they did, how did they influence the other work of SMUDataArts?
So, I would say, it's funny because we might look at it and say it was a success story, but it is an ongoing story today. I mean, just today, if you go to their website, you'll see an invitation for input because they're looking at the profile again to streamline it again. And I think about that in today's climate where we have organizations that are truly in distress, and worse than during the last recession, because they don't have a future where they can operate in the ways that they have always operated, right? So I'm really proud that those lessons became so ingrained and that they are a fundamental aspect of the way that that organization is moving forward. But I think the key elements of it, there were 4 commitments that we made, and they were around being that we would be customer focused and data informed, so that we could assure that we were actually building value and putting value into the marketplace. The notion of being early to market for continuous learning and improvement, well, that's to the point, Jessica, you made about putting out a product that maybe isn't always 100% ready. And we took a lot of heat for that. People were like, why isn't it perfect? Why isn't it working? And the answer was, with that kind of range of users and stakeholders, you could not possibly test for every case use, every use case. So you had to let the use cases develop and teach you as you went along. Now, the way that percolated over was into the rest of the way the organization operated, because we were there building a technology platform, and there were people whose job was to build that and make sure that worked for people. But on the other side of the house, we were an education organization. We were offering a lot of training and development to enable our users to use the product and to learn more about how to manage their organizations. We were providing customer service. We had internal processes around customer service. My customer service reps, at the point at which we, when we started this journey, they would sit down to put on their headset, and they would have to log into about 6 different programs. Right, in order to do the customer service activity. Well, even just that process of saying, okay, can we run a sprint that can deconstruct that process of what is the customer service process delivery? So we just went through the entire organization, whether it was that financial, how do we run the financial management and the invoicing? All of these things, we would run them through exactly that process. We would put together a small work group team. We would run them through the, who's the customer, who's the, what service are we providing? What job is there? What job are they trying to do? And all of that work, and the staff did it themselves. They watched it working on the technology. And then they said, hey, do you mind if we begin creating, these essentially, small teams to do this kind of work? And so that's how I saw it really making a difference. So, the third commitment was being open to change and not wed to a plan. Now that can be pretty, that's kind of tough when you're inside an organization and you'd like to have more of a clear sense of what am I going to do today and what's my job going to look like. And I will say that, we were in what was effectively a startup, and there's not a lot of, there's not a lot of tethering to the ground oftentimes in a startup, and that can be challenging for the people who work there. But what they learned was that they could continually be engaged in meaningful creative work in relation to their jobs. And ultimately what that led to was, this team that was very self-organizing, very self-motivated, and really committed to the stakeholders that they were representing inside the organization. So in all those ways, I saw that rolling over into the organization.
I saw another section of your article which piqued my interest. It was about limited resources and having certain team members step up to fill roles that they literally didn't have a technical background in, to try to backfill some of this need. And it just was like amazing, because one of the biggest struggles for nonprofits is staffing and having enough resources to fulfill their community needs.
Yes. And, we were able to hire, really talented coders to do, this was a massive heavy lift, and it's a huge database situation that is extremely, extremely complicated. But we essentially trained up people who were, a box office manager from a local theater, a playwright, a ballet dancer, all of these people who were there, who were pretty much there in customer service functions, they became the product owners. And so they became the requirements gatherers. They became the people who wrote those development stories and narratives. And ultimately, several of them became literally in the product management roles,
Wow.
left their customer service roles and moved over into product management roles. And they're highly skilled, really effective folks. So what did that take? I mean, that took, I would be lying if I didn't say, or not lying, but I would be leaving out an important part of this story, which is this is not for everybody. There were certainly people who had come to work at $1 billion foundation where they were not asked to get out, essentially they were told very clearly to stay in their lanes, for whom this kind of flowing, fluid, ambiguous workplace was not for them. And, over the course of the years, many of them made the decision to move on to other roles. A core group of these people, however, have been with that organization now, nigh on to 15 years, coming up on 20 years, some of them, because they grew in the jobs and because they could see the power of the work and see what it would do for the field that they cared so much about and for themselves. And I think that connection is what made it possible for them to step up and to take on the learning. We also had a way of working, we did ultimately, of course, as it moved on, it's way too expensive to maintain a technology. We were not just an organization that used technology. We were a technology company. And so we built that technology infrastructure over time. But even then, that allowed us to work much more effectively with the consultants that, as we needed them, and to put the consultants onto an as needed basis. And it really did bring the cost and the run rate down on doing this kind of work. This was a pretty significant build. I mean, this wasn't just building a website. This was a very significant application.
I'm so thankful, Beth, that you agreed to come on and do this interview with Diane and I for Agile and Nonprofits. And, I would just for those of our viewers who are maybe not in a position where they have someone on the technology side that can help them get started with Agile, is there any advice on how they could adopt this, some of the principles or practices, or specifically something to do with maybe Scrum or the Scrum framework?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just say that the fundamental piece is a commitment to the customer's voice, to knowing who is it that you're there to serve, the beneficiary or the customer or the stakeholder, whatever you're calling it in your organization. Listening to their voice, finding ways to be in deep interaction with them, to whether you're developing a product offering or a service for them. If you are in a service-oriented kind of nonprofit, it is really to make sure that you invite them in a really genuine way to help inform that product development on the front end, not after it's done, and that you be willing to test in that iterative way. That you are willing to put it out in small chunks where people can give you feedback. And every time you ask for feedback, you're just deepening a relationship with them in a way that just bonds them to your organization more and more. And give the room to your employees to do this creative work and to own these projects and to form those kinds of teams so that they can, work together, co-create together, and learn together ultimately.
I can't wait. That is such an amazing message for leaders to hear that are giving the vision, give space for that to happen. And also, I think for the nonprofit employees to hear too, please let me lead up, right? And say, please give me space for the creative. So it can come from both directions. And I think what a powerful message for us to be able to end our conversation on today, Beth. I think that might inspire some real change to hear that, what that looks like and the success that you had. I'm so grateful that you've taken time to be with us and to share your journey and to, I think, inspire some other change across the nonprofit sector. So I thank you very much for that.
Thank you for having me. I think that what you're doing is great and it's much needed and needed more today than ever. So thank you very much.
Thank you.